right, everybody. This is our special episode, if you ask me, where we're going to talk about women's inclusion in Side B spaces. Life on Side B is a podcast where we talk about the intersection of faith and sexuality and those types of things. This is a ministry that is also connected with Posture Shift that helps different people to learn how to interact with their different family members and their churches with the LGBT community, if that's the best explanation I think I can come up with. I'm not good at introductions, so that's that. But, so I'm Ashley, and everybody knows who I am, I think. Sarah is joining us, I think, for the third time this season, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. Yep.
We've been busy.
Truly.
And Johanna, I think it's the second time you've been here this season.
Second time, yeah.
All right, so let's see. Josh asked if I wanted to do this episode, and I was like, well, you can do, like, still be there and ask the questions, and we can have, like, a guy's live reaction to it. But everybody's like, no, we'll just do it ourselves. I was like, okay, that's fine. Because one was the live reaction, two, we get this awkward part out of the way. But then again, it is, I think it's interesting to be like, we've not had really this at all. Like, we've always tried to have, like, since we started doing co-hosts, to be at least have the same amount of, like, guys and girls on there. But a lot of times it's still, and we try to always have some of us in an episode, but, like, really female-led conversations and stuff, I don't think I've come across much either. Just, I think the closest thing would be probably Laurie Krieg's Hold My Heart podcast, and that's still very equally shared with her husband and her producer, Steve. So, I think a good place to start is, besides just Life on Side B and, like, Side B spaces, where do we think we've seen women left out of the sexuality conversation in general, like, historically, like, overall? Because, like, I'm thinking about it, I think it's something that's goes a lot further back than just Side B. Like, it's not something that started there or ends there. Is that question? Or not? The very little I know, because like I said, I think I'm the one who has probably, like, the least involvement with, like, the broader LGBT community, besides things where I tried to just educate myself and read and watch documentaries and do the best that I can to know what I can. And looking back on, like, what is ow, my leg, just different, like, parts of the history historically, it was always usually led by the conversation is, if not led by, overtaken by men.
Yeah.
Like, it's something that is always just, like, when you look back on the history of sexuality, it's something that's usually, for some reason or another, it's like the women are kind of, like, almost a side of the conversation. When the gay liberation movement was coming along, lesbians, or, you know, women in general, were kind of to the side, partly intentionally. I think they just liked not having to deal with the spotlight and all that, but it was very much something that we were excluded from a conversation, and I think came back into later on. And not to mention how women have not been included in leading theological conversations ever. Really, it's probably only recently, which, ironically, lately, with people talking about women being pastors and all this type of things, but just because I grew up non-denominational and not knowing things, I didn't even know that was a thing till I was in my 20s.
A thing that women could be pastors, or a thing that women could not?
Could not.
Oh, wow.
Because, like, I guess I just didn't know what the technical or practical differences were in titles or whatever. I'm like, you have Joyce Meyer and you have Beth Moore. Like, aren't those pastors? And I didn't know. I was a kid. I still don't know what Joyce Meyer is technically, I guess.
Rich is what she is. I'm sorry.
No tea, no shade.
I'm sorry.
That's not wrong. Um,
I'm
but
sorry.
I guess because they always said like women couldn't teach men, and I'm like, I'm sure that's not only women that listen to Joyce Meyer or something. She's on TV. I don't know. It's just it was like when I was, and it's very non-denominational in the South is very Pentecostal influenced, I guess to an extent, and so you still usually have women in leadership roles. My church does have a couple women pastors, not just the children's pastor, but like different ministry pastors, like our associate pastors, not our main pastor. So I didn't know that you couldn't do that until recently. And so getting more to know the more Christian like ethos and elite, it was like, oh, there's a lot more rules to this about what women can and can't do that I did not know about coming from a small church.
Yeah, no, that's real. Something that I would like to read and learn more about at some point in my life. It's just like women's agency in general. And I think when we think about the sexuality conversation, part of the reason that I think women have been left out of it, particularly from a historical standpoint, is just because like women haven't had the agency to make decisions about their lives and to make like to have control over what their future was going to look like until very recently. And I think that one day I would love to do research, or for someone in my life to do research about what it means and like how we can approach the sexuality conversation and the side B conversation differently, because we just very recently have the ability. I mean, like monks have existed forever, and like men have been able to choose into those ways of living, and in a way that I think women have not. And I would love to learn more about that. So that's a thought historically.
I do think there's been in the history of the gay, if we're looking back in the history, we're sort of pre LGBTQ, blah, blah, blah. But,
Mm-hmm.
If we're looking back in the sort of like gay rights movement era, I do think there's a lot of, um, just a tendency for uh, women to be largely invisible or not have much to do about anything. I think partly because they had their own sets of concerns, right? Often feminist related concerns.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Partly because, guys can have a knack for dominating conversations. And I think there's a way in which uh, gay men can kind of cling to uh, sort of the dominance and authority that maleness gives them, right? Because it's sort of like, something they've got, and I do think there has been a tendency, uh, or it's not the whole story, but I do think there's a strain, as you look back of men, particularly gay men, who simply prefer the company of other men and are mostly focused on the concerns of
Yeah.
other men. And, women are just sort of peripheral, women are just sort of marginal, not really.
Yep.
I don't think it's always always was like an overt misogyny, although I think sometimes it was, but I think just women didn't really register on their radar
At all.
a lot
Yeah.
of times, I think, in a lot
Yeah.
of
True.
ways,
Yeah.
um, so of course things are made. I think that whole dynamic is also made more challenging by the fact that uh, I feel like in side B we are the number imbalance
Oh yeah.
is much bigger than in the broader community.
Getting I would say too recently getting better, but yeah, no, there was I remember when I was like just getting into it and everything, there was a stark difference.
Yeah.
It was the ratio was very off.
Yeah.
But still, like, a lot of places, it's a lot better than it was, so I've been here for like 20 something years, and maybe it was 10 to 1 when I started, and now it's like 5 to 1, 6 to 1 on a
Mm-hmm.
good day, like
Yeah,
I feel like if you've got one woman for every 4 dudes, you're like, yes, we're
pretty
really
much. Yeah, like
we're
I
we're like, that's
think
wonderful, and it's surreal, right? Because you would think 50% of the population, or 50 plus percent of the population,
50 plus, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's just weird. But I think that's sort of an interesting conversation on its own. Is why is the imbalance? I feel particularly inside me so strong.
Do you have thoughts on that question?
Yeah, like I think I remember the huh?
No, go ahead, Ashley.
Um. Oh no, sorry. Were you saying Ashley?
Like you remember, I think it was the retreat I went to, me and you were both at. I think it was, they had said it was like the first one we had so many women, and we were like, it was like me, you, um, this was the year before Revoice.
Okay.
Um, so it's
Wait,
me.
how many women? But how many men were
Yeah, it's
there?
like it was just over one hand, but how many of us were there total? There was like
Yeah. No, like
almost 30.
50.
That's so.
Oh, no, it's more than that. I thought it's only
It
30.
was?
I thought it was like well, and maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, I could
It
be
was a
totally be
big
wrong.
retreat. It was,
It
that's what I'm saying. It
was.
was a big retreat, and there was like this
Yeah.
many women. It was like, wow, we really
Like,
represented this time.
if it's 30
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
and six are women,
Yeah.
that's still like 5 to 1.
Yeah. No,
Mm,
exactly, exactly. But that's like as good as it gets. It feels
yeah.
like
That's
sometimes.
how it
So,
felt. Yeah, it's like, man, it's not gonna get better than
well,
this.
because I went one year and I was the only woman, and that was like,
I
ooh,
think
that's
you said
weird.
that happened more than once, though, right?
Uh, to me, it only happened once. Someone
Okay.
else went once, and they were the only woman. But,
Yeah, like it.
but it only got me once. Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great retreat, and we have
Yeah.
nothing against the guys. There's been multiple times in my life I'm the one chick in like this group of guys, and it's, I don't want to say never bothered me, but it's a situation I'm
Mm,
comfortable enough in. But then you go
Hmm.
and you look back on it, and you're like, why is that though?
Hmm.
And I remember when I was like, I say I probably started looking for resource material and community like 6 years ago, and just always just finding any books were always written by men. I think books written by women is only very recently, with like the past like maybe a couple of years, at the very least in side B and sexuality stuff. It was all men that had written it. Um, any groups or blogs, it was almost always a guy that you could find. Um, so, do you guys think that the women being left out of the theological conversation and sexuality conversation influences that stark difference inside B spaces, or is it something in and of itself, like its own animal?
I I think it's I think there are lots of factors. Um, for one thing, I think um, so more women I think find themselves on a on a bi spectrum or on an ace spectrum. Uh, and I think historically side B groups were about support for living this difficult kind of
mm,
life. I mean, I'm not saying that's like what it is or what it's supposed to be, but I think historically it comes out of a tradition of we're trying to encourage each other to, you know, stay celibate or stay faithful in mixed orientation marriage,
Mm,
and just sort of be there for each other and encourage each other.
mm,
And I think one of the factors that I think isn't a result of any fault on the guy's part is that uh, I think in some cases women, at least for those reasons, have felt less need for something like side B support or community or identity, right? Because they can, because of sexual fluidity or more room to uh,
slightly more room to breathe.
slightly more room to breathe in terms of their own sexuality, slightly less intense sense like, oh, I want this one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is the only thing that's going to work for me. How can I live a good life
mm,
without it? You know,
Yeah.
that I think that doesn't come up as strongly. It doesn't always come up as strongly. It certainly came up that strongly for me, but I think for a lot of women, it doesn't come up as strongly.
Yeah.
I think recently we've seen a trend with more people connecting with side B and just identifying with side B and side B community for a broader set of reasons, right? Just
Yes.
uh, like-minded people, experiences, processing. It's not as much of the sort of support group mentality that I think it was for a while. But I wonder if that tradition influences it in some way. And I think one thing that a blessing is that we have going for us is uh, I feel like a lot of times we can integrate better in some sense into Christian spaces because women freak out less. Straight women freak out less, in my experience, than straight men do about
Okay.
having a gay friend. You know
Hmm.
what I mean?
Yeah. I
Like,
was gonna say where, how, and then you say in comparison to straight men. I was like, okay, yeah.
yeah. So I've had very little experience with uh, straight female friends being weirded out by me. You know, or being weirded out like, oh no, what if like, am I gonna? Is she gonna
Right. Yeah.
hit
Yeah.
on me? You know, is she gonna make a move? Or that's or where what's our relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there may be anxiety and embarrassment on my own end, but
Right.
that's it's all been sort of internally generated. But I've heard lots of stories from guys uh, where I think in more particularly more especially conservative parts of the country,
It made things weird.
they free right. I mean, even just admitting that you're gay or can make things weird, really weird. In a way that might make close friendship difficult for a lot of people.
Hmm.
I think
Yeah.
for a lot of guys. So I don't know. Like these are just some thoughts that I've had about why it might be different. Aside from the very real things you point out about sort of women be excluded from a lot of these conversations or
In the first place. Yeah. Yeah.
marginalized, not a lot of these conversations generally, but those are some of the other things that I wonder, like, is this playing a part too? Um,
Like things on a practical lived level. Yeah.
yeah, like I think guys are often just more, I don't know, desperate seems like a very harsh word, but something nicer that but I feel like guys just it's a bigger thing for them. And I mean I enjoy getting to know side B women a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like it's not been maybe it's not on the same level. I don't know. That's just something I wonder
It's
about.
not something that presses on you as much as you feel like it does on some of the guys.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it doesn't have the same sense of urgency to an extent.
Right, right. Or I feel like, you know, I could put some of my relational energy in this direction or I could direct
So
it
like
somewhere else.
having
You know what I mean?
Right.
queer
Yeah.
friends, queer female friends in particular, is less important to you than it is to the like typical side B gay man.
I don't
Oh, I was
know.
clarifying what you were saying, and so
No,
okay.
no, I think that's right. I think that's right. But now you're making me uncertain,
Making me
right? But
question it.
but
Yeah.
I
Hmm.
think that might be
Yeah.
right in some cases. Um, I think that might, like I said, for one thing, I haven't been rejected
Mm-hmm.
by women in the church, friends or not friends, in a way that I
Hmm.
think a lot of guys can be. The other thing I think happens is I think more women inside B tend to either uh, get married or foster children,
Hmm.
I
and
was. I
therefore,
was. I was
I
gonna
mean,
talk about that too.
and I think that is again is another way in which you're sort of you're spending time and energy. It's going
Somewhere
somewhere
else.
else, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to
Yeah,
side B stuff
that makes a
particularly.
lot of sense.
Yeah.
And I don't want to. There's totally a lot of great guys fostering and a lot of great guys, doing marriage and stuff like that. So I don't want to like uh, ignore them or erase them in any way. But I do think there's a greater tendency for women to do those
I
things.
also wonder. I think in conversations I've had with side B men, generally the like compulsive heterosexuality was much less ingrained in their understanding of the world and their understanding of like what their future would look like when like little baby Sarah knew exactly what type of man she would marry and like had all of these things that like it just didn't even click in my brain like this is not how like I had all of these things of here is how I will create a functioning marriage even though I am not attracted to men at all and
Wow.
like have
Wow.
a specific type of man
Yeah.
I am attracted to that I had to learn that like no Sarah like this is not what attraction feels like this is just how you have been trained your entire life to interact with men and
Wow.
so part of me wonders if well two things one I think like that pressure that women have then means that women are just out less. And if you're bisexual, like, you are much more incentivized because of the systems in which we exist to marry a man, or to like ignore this attraction or not engage it or what have you. Um, but I also think that gay men, like with cis het men, they have to interact with me at some level because maybe I'm attracted to them. Like, they have to learn to interact with women and have to learn in some way to be attracted to women or to be attractive to women. And so I think they're incentivized more into those interactions in a way that, like, gay men are not interested in women and never have been, and may not have had the same like societal church pressures to be interested in women, and thus never learn those skills. And I think in a lot of ways we don't talk about that as the misogyny that it sometimes can be.
That sounds interesting. I guess I hadn't thought about that, like, in specifically in like a faith setting. I'm thinking like youth groups, for example. Like, if you see like teenagers or something and that's like they're not like super boy crazy or super girl crazy, that's gonna be one encouraged to, like, you know, it to a certain extent. And so if the guy's really not like, you know, totally after the girls, they're not really gonna talk to them about it. But girls are still gonna be talked about how like marriage and husband, and because that's almost like what the purpose is. Whereas the guys, they're gonna be pushing them in this direction of learning how to be this, that, and the other thing. Whereas us, the one of the few directions that they're gonna push us into is how to be a good wife.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't grow up in the church, so I didn't have that experience in particular. But I know from talking to lots of other like what you described, Sarah, I think hits the nail right on the head for a lot of women who grew up in the church. A lot of their experience is that growing up to be a wife and mom is just so central to your destiny, to your purpose, and I hadn't even thought about that, like I said, because I was outside of that, like how that would affect your ability to, like you say, even come out, even understand what's going on, fully see and understand what's going on with you, admit it to yourself in the first place, because it's so outside of this grid, right? You've been given. Yeah, and I also think that's just super. I wasn't sure how to put it, but I think you put your finger on it so excellently, which is that you know, straight guys are motivated to
learn how to interact,
be appealing to women or understand women, engage
Yep.
with women in a certain way, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've got an incentive, and gay guys don't, and I think that definitely is part
And
of
it's interesting because
how it
most people
pans out.
think that gay guys will get along with women better because of stereotypes and this,
Right.
that, and the other thing. But it's not always true either. And it's like they like I said, they don't have the incentive to want to learn how to interact with us, other than maybe like surface level things.
Well, and think about how much, going back to like a church context, how much of interaction and relationship with men and women, between men and women, is confined to dating, romantic,
Or parental.
sexual,
I'll
like,
say in a
so
church setting, yeah, in a faith setting, it's
yeah.
like you get to a certain age, and that's automatically what's going to be, the interaction's going to be viewed like. It's automatically going to be either, guys over here, girls over here, depending on, like, the type of structure you are, or even like, you start talking to each other and you're going to have your pastor talking to you, asking you questions. What's this? What's that? And it's like, I feel like the first time that happens to any teenager, they're like, what? I didn't know there were rules of engagement to talking to people. And they come down with this whole thing, and it's like, no, when you start doing I was blindsided when I was 16, 17 years old. Me and a friend of mine were talking on the phone, and I got in serious trouble because my mom said I wasn't allowed to talk to guys on the phone. And I was like, I'm not? That rule was never established. And she's like, yeah, because, and I don't remember what the explanation was. It was vague, and it's like it's too private or something like that, and you need
that one's
to avoid
big.
the appearance of evil, or I don't remember
That was
exactly what
probably
it
the
was.
farthest thing from your mind, right?
I'll say at the very least with that guy it was. Like, I mean, I was just talking to some dude and it was like not even a thing. It was like a friend of mine or something. I was a teenager and I had a phone. I was homeschooled. I never left the house. I've had an opportunity to talk to somebody. That's my situation. Like, I was just this little homeschool kid and it was just like, no, you're not allowed to talk to guys on the phone. I was like, oh, didn't know that. And because I was like so like I didn't know that was a thing, I think she kind of like forgot or let it go later. It's like if I ever did, I just made sure she didn't see me, because she's not gonna, unless she's determined, look at the phone bill and call the numbers. So I was like, I remember I would text, and then at one point there was like a guy who called me, and it was a guy I had met on a mission trip and everything, and we had been talking for a while, and he called me one day to tell me that his niece or nephew had been born or something. I was like, yeah, cool, that's nice, bye. Because like both of my parents were like standing on each side of me, and they're like, who's that? Friend of mine, sister had a baby. And didn't even want to, like, who? I was like, somebody met on a mission trip. Like, wasn't even get into it because it was just like this weirdness around a lot of it. And don't even want to get into the one time I did like a guy. That was hell. My mom talked to his mom.
Ooh.
Messy.
It was bad. Yeah. And then we ended up not talking for months because it just made everything weird. And it was like, if y'all don't talk, we're going to make, all four of us are going to sit down and we're going to talk. And I was like, about what?
Yeah.
Like, jeez. I was 16. I was like, yeah, I was admittedly flirting, but this was too deep for me. I was like, I'm out. I'm fine. So that just makes, it's like the environment that church kids grows up in. It definitely makes things awkward and weird to an extent. But like Sarah said, like, one, I am bi to an extent, in high school more so.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact that like just the feelings I had for women didn't register. I didn't know they were anything different than anybody else felt. I thought that's how everybody was, honestly. Like, they were just like, no, that's not the case. But it just didn't register. So it was always like, marriage and a family was just always something that was going to happen somehow, somewhere in the future. Yeah, to me, I thought it was a given. I thought that's just how it worked.
Yeah. Going back to your earlier point, Johanna, about the ways that we see men and women interacting even in like church context, I think it's also it's something I've noticed in myself, that if I'm in a group of men, I can slip into like the mom function where I'm like making sure everyone's eating and cleaning up after everyone and doing all of the cooking and like being the one that everyone goes to with their emotional problems. And I think that just like fosters this environment where I'm not like, yes, I am fully part of the group, but also the cost to me is much bigger than the cost to these other people, that I think creates that disconnect. And I think that can happen inside these spaces too.
Really?
Yeah.
I feel like I do that in either mix. One, I am the oldest of 9 children, so there's a part of just habit in some of those things.
Yes.
I find I do that in either mixed company or with my usually like girlfriends, but like with my guy friends, I don't.
Interesting.
Like at all. No. It, like I said, I feel like I have a lot of brothers. I've had guy friends growing up. I remember like even in missions, I'd be like the one chick standing at the barbecue pit with the guys. It's like, one, there's food here. You know, it's like we're starting there. But I would be like, I could slip into this easily, and it wasn't hard. But no, that's not where that function does for me. It's either, like I said, either mixed company or with girls, like at work. Be it I'm only like 30, all these other chicks are like 20 and 22. I'd be like, your shoes are falling apart. You need to get new ones. Why aren't you wearing your glasses? Did you eat before you came to work?
And I think I love that role, and there's a lot of beauty into it. I think what I don't like is when I default into it. Like if I am actively
Mm-hmm.
choosing into that, wonderful,
Right.
beautiful. But
Mm-hmm.
when it's not needed, and when it's like this is an online
Mm-hmm.
space and you people are perfectly capable of taking care of yourselves and also talk to each other about your feelings and name when you need me to do emotional, like all of, I think those things are like more, taking care of people is beautiful. One of the things I love about being queer is the way that like I can take care of people in ways that are differently gendered than society says they should be. But
Mm-hmm.
when I just fall into it is when I have tension.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't exactly the same thing, but it might be somewhat related. I feel like where it comes in for me is if there's an argument or tension or conflict uh, in a side B space with a bunch of guys, like, oh my gosh, I just want to like take care of everybody and help everybody get along and be the perfect
Really?
diplomat and help
Yep.
everybody. All these people were completely tone deaf to each other's feelings and what they are
Yeah.
saying and how this
Yeah.
other person is responding. And yeah, there's a way in which that can be a good thing, but yeah, if I'm going there when I don't need to go there, or if I'm going there in a way that prevents me from engaging in the conversation on my own, or being fully part of it myself,
Yeah.
then yeah, that that's the trap I fall into is
Yeah.
That's interesting, and I'm really happy that someone feels the need or wants to try to do that, because a lot of times when they love you all, my side B brothers in Christ, but y'all are petty.
yeah.
And when y'all get like that, we hide from y'all. We leave y'all. Not Johanna. She wants to help y'all. The
Well,
rest of us,
I don't
we're
do it
gonna
as
let
much
y'all
as I
tear
should.
each
I
other
used to do it
apart.
more, but
Well, yeah, no, but I'm like, when they get like that, honestly, I'm like, y'all. Same thing I would do with my brothers. I'm like, please bleed outside. Like when they start bubbling into each other and they're just like, ready to tear each other apart. It's like, do that over there.
Away from me.
Like, I don't have the time or the energy to want to do
yeah.
any
Yeah,
any
well,
of that.
yeah, and that's part of it, being realistic about what my impact can be, right?
Mm.
Like trying to fix
Yeah.
things I can't fix, trying to save situations I can't save. I feel like my femaleness is sort of connected to that in some way.
Yeah,
You
in
know,
a,
I,
in a
I feel
way,
like it's
like
sort of
trying to be the peacemaker.
like I feel like women sort of tend to have that as a thing um more on average than guys do. But that for me, that's a trap. And something I have to catch myself in because
Yeah.
it does get unhealthy. It just grinds me down.
Yeah.
Because it's almost to an extent like these, like, I don't want to say it's a negative way, but it's like these arguments or these heated discussions are going to happen no matter what, and we can't avoid them. So always try to stop it and not let it happen to an extent, even though we don't understand it, and to us it looks chaotic and bad. It may not always be that, and we don't always need to stop it. And I think that's another way that we can see that, like, the way we approach things is different too, because like I said, the guys, they get very heated and stuff that sometimes we're like, it wasn't even that big of a deal.
Mm.
And it's
Hmm.
just like almost we don't understand. I think it's almost kind of like what you said, just that intensity that we're just like, maybe we don't have for certain things. And that's also probably one of the reasons that we're not, like, in some of these conversations. It's just like, I don't want to say we're not as invested, but just not invested in that way. I don't know how to explain it. Am I making sense?
No, that totally that totally makes sense. And I also think you bring up the excellent point that trying to stop conflict from happening is not always the best thing. Sometimes it's good for stuff to come on out there, and
Yeah.
It's not always helped. I'll say in like the different, groups that we're in, and we've seen these arguments develop and just happen repeatedly over time, no matter what we do or say.
hmm
Um, I think sometimes, a few times, some of those conversations that were hard, when it didn't get trivial, good things did come of them.
Yeah.
Like, there have been times where it's like it went nowhere and it was going nowhere. But there have been a couple of discussions that I've seen where it's like, yeah, it did bring about, it did bring about some awareness to a problem that maybe different people didn't know was a problem. And almost to that extent of, like, a lot of times women wanting to stop a problem or be peacemakers or avoid problems, we might let certain things left unsaid. Us being left out of the conversation, for example, we get so tired of saying, like,
Yep.
I have something to say, 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 and no one calls on you, be like, what do you have to say? That you just stop raising your hand and you just let them dominate. Like, oh, you go ahead and you lead the conversation. You do it. It's fine. And I'll chip in when you ask me or stuff like that. And I think it's interesting, at the very least, how the conversation many times, a long time ago maybe, I don't know if I want to say a long time ago, or at least for a longer amount of time, because the conversation on sexuality was so much based in male sexuality, that's why women didn't relate to it at all either.
Yeah.
One, like I said, it comes a lot of, like, ex-gay stuff too, like, if you want to go into, like, how faith was talked about, but even just not just that, just it was all talked about how men related to each other or related to women or this, that, and it's like, well, in female sexuality, it's like it was there are similarities, but it was different. So it's like there were certain things that didn't overlap, and that's for a long time why I feel like we weren't even part of the conversation, because it's almost like you were talking about something different. It's like they're both gay, but it's like they're both oriented towards different things.
Mm-hmm. And also, connected to that is also, I think, historically it's taken us a long time to, at least in this sort of recent cycle, it's taken us a long time to come to terms with the fact that women have sexuality and have a sexuality.
Yes. Yeah.
That's something that I think is, was sidelined, right? For, I think, a lot of the 1800s, a lot of the 1900s. I feel like it's a cycle that comes back and forth, but I feel like the most recent swing we were on was, women, not really sexual.
Yeah, that
and in that
still
case,
comes up sometimes.
yeah, and I think that's
Straight guys.
another way in which our experience gets sort of minimized, or sort of, it's not really as serious or important as
it is for guys.
As it is for the guys.
Yeah.
And I think that's a real thing.
It's different. It's not that it's less important to us. It just, I feel like we relate to it differently. And I think that also goes back to Sarah's point from before about agency, because it was like, you don't make decisions for yourself. So you're was also related to that. It's like, well, you don't have, I feel like it, like you said, we don't have sexuality. It's like our sexuality didn't point us anywhere. It was almost like only a reaction thing. It was never an action thing.
Right.
It was reacting to guys' sexuality or reacting to a guy's need or something like that. And it was never something that came from us as women. And that's also like a part that, like you said, is new. It's like, oh, well, maybe women do have their own thing.
Yeah.
In, like, what kind of things do we have? I think, like, how have we seen, I feel like the progress we've seen at the very least inside B circles has been, like I said, within the past few years. Just recently, we've seen a few women write books. We've had more participation of women in, like I said, even in our few retreats. I really like that the women have taken their own initiative to make their own retreats. I think that's amazing. So where do you guys see hope in these conversations?
I got on this soapbox early last summer. Been thinking a lot about women's inclusion inside B, and got on a soapbox about how, one, like, what it means to essentialize women in spaces. And so I went from the extreme of, like, men not recognizing that I exist to men, like every time I said something being like, Sarah, you were so incredible and everything you say, and like, which is very kind, but also I think continues this disconnect of like we are not actually engaging in relationship with each other and we're not getting to know each other. You're still just using me for my ideas and so that you can check your like I have a woman in this
Your
conversation
box off.
Hmm.
box. And so I think I've gained a lot of hope from men who have been very intentional to build relationship with me outside of a necessarily side B, or like not necessarily because they need my side B insight, but because they genuinely are invested in relationship. And I think that's been something that has been really life giving for me in within side B spaces. So I think that's a place that I find hope. And also men who ask good questions,
Yeah.
because I think this comes with being a marginalized person in a lot of different areas that I can very often like know the things that my friends do that hurt me or that aren't helpful for them and point those out to them, but it's very hard to like initiate those conversations. And so I think when people have come to me and
Mm-hmm.
said like how can I make more space for women, or are there things that I'm doing that are getting in the way of people with marginalized gender identities interacting in this space, I'm able to say yes, like when you talk in this way or when you talk about these things, are you thinking about the fact that this is not just a bunch of men that are talking. And I think people having the introspection to ask for those things has been really life giving. But also, I've only been inside these spaces for a year, 2 years. So I feel like I don't necessarily have the progress over the years perspective.
No, that's really cool. That's really encouraging. Um, yeah, like you say, real friendships with guys. Um, totally transcending that woman's perspective thing. But I've had a few of those uh, friendships that have been just really precious to me, and finding that we can communicate specifically from this side B perspective that we have our different perspectives, but there's so much we can connect on and resonate with each other on and speak together. I've like I find those points of connection really encouraging. And that's one good thing that one of the many good things that came for me out of Revoice is connecting with a lot more guys. I've always had side B guy friends, but it's been something that um, has sort of opened up more, just a lot more conversations, and that's been really encouraging. I'm really encouraged to see guys reading, either listening to side B women uh, speakers, like Eve, or like reading Eve's book, reading Rachel's book, uh, guys connecting with and learning from women. I mean, I think that's a great thing. Um, and yeah, I feel so sad I couldn't end up making this last retreat, but the retreat that I was at in Tennessee, that we did that. After all these years of talking about, you don't know this, Sarah, but we literally for like a decade were just talking about, um, yeah, the women should get together and do something. And it never happened and never happened. And, and there just seem to be so many barriers to it, right? Women in general have less financial resources than men do. And so we just have less ability to make things happen, like airfare or,
Yeah.
lodging or, um, and that we were able, and I think the way we designed that retreat to, we did the cooking. It was sort of shorter in duration. It was a location lots of people could drive to. That we were able to overcome obstacles and make that happen. And it was a beautiful space. Uh, yeah, that we're figuring out how to do things. And now I do want to say, and y'all can disagree with me on this, but as precious as that woman's space has been to me, I do wish and hope that guys would, in general, when the guys are doing something, that they would consider very carefully uh, before making it single sex. I feel like there are a lot of side B groups and organizations that are explicitly male centered. And I think the assumption is often, oh, that the women will do their own thing, and the women can. And I feel like for a lot of reasons, that's just hard. So that would be my one plea, to guys is, and I get it that there may be situations in which it's truly necessary, but I would just ask them to consider, don't make the assumption that the women have their own thing going on, and the women can make their own thing happen. Because if you think about how hard it is for you as a side B guy, um, to get a critical mass of people and resources together to make whatever you want to happen. And then imagine, you have 1/8 of that, or
Yeah.
1/5 of that on a good
Yep.
day, and it's the I'm so I'm so encouraged by the women's retreat, uh, uh, but I don't want that to. I want to celebrate that and rejoice in that, but I don't want to send the message that, oh yeah, the women have their own thing going on, so we can go do our happy, gay guy connecting with deep male friendship thing off on our own, and affirm our masculinity, and you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, like that. It's like, I think a lot of the conversations that have just been had over the years, like if you want to go like before side B with side B, just like over the, just looking at over the period of time, it's that's because that's what a lot of the thing was. It was about getting, because it was getting back to your masculinity or connecting to your masculinity or whatever, and obviously that's not the direction they wanted to push us in the church. So we didn't go to those meetings, or we didn't go to those church functions or group talks or whatever, because that's not exactly what they wanted to get us into. And I think the part of what you said about like the finances too is a big thing that a lot of the guys probably don't realize and or think about. And I think in like before recently, I would notice that a lot of times the only women that would really be more consistently there in certain functions or things were women that were married and had more finances, had more access to finances
Yep.
than single women would.
Yep.
And a lot of times, many times, for any retreats or anything we would be having, it would be consistently a lot of the same women being like, I can't afford it. I just can't afford it. I can't afford to save that money. I can't afford to miss that much work.
Yep.
Something like that. And that's why a lot of times also, not only do you see like a lack of women inside these spaces, you saw a lack of celibate women inside these spaces. You had celibate gay men and women in mixed orientation marriages, and not a lot of the opposite, where you have you wouldn't see a lot of celibate women and you wouldn't see a lot of men in mixed orientation marriages. And now I feel like only recently it's starting to level out, and it's because of what Johanna said earlier, that we include more now, like you said, bisexual, aspec people in our conversations, whereas before, and I mean, I know I definitely felt a bit of that when I first joined the group. I'm like, I'm not exclusively same-sex attracted, even though it's only a smidge. It's a little more than some people have, and I felt almost privileged to an extent, and I guess you could say that I am. And I'm like, and I'm married, I'm not celibate, I'm not feeling the same pressure everybody's feeling, so I don't really want to put myself in that space that might not be mine. I'll even admit I've felt that recently with having the baby. Like, I remember I used to go to the side B group to tell everybody everything. Anything that happened in my life, good, bad, whatever, I would tell everybody everything. Be like, hey, this is going on. And then when I got pregnant, I obviously told everybody because I was excited. But I didn't want to go to the group and, like, share that as much when I know a lot of people who want to have children and don't have that option. I didn't want to be like, baby!
Same here.
And I just kind of drew back a little bit, and I know that now that we have more of that representation. Women do kind of join in more, that it's like, oh, we have a lot of asexual people and bisexual and pansexual people in the group. It's not just exclusively same-sex attracted people who are celibate that this is for. That's why I push against they calling it the celibate position as much, because it's not as inclusive. It's of all the people who might relate to this faith walk, which is what side right, become a little more of.
I also think, correct me if I'm mistaken, that the Side B Women's Retreat, the first one, was fundraised through the main group. And so, like, men contributed money so that the women's retreat could happen.
That is true. That is true. I forgot that. You are right.
And I think that's another prime example of, like reasons we have hope for the future, and, like, what it looks like to engage in this conversation well. That, like, not only do you intellectually and, like, recognize that women are important to the conversation, but you also recognize that women are, like, that women being together is important and are willing to, like, put your money where your mouth is. Oh,
I didn't remember that. That's cool.
No, it is true. It's totally, now, like, as soon as you mentioned it, I was like,
I didn't go to either of them. I just watched from afar.
Sad day.
That's for
And I remember being so encouraged. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. Oh no, I remember that now that you mentioned it, and I was so encouraged to hear, that. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I shouldn't have been surprised, but I was totally surprised that they stepped up.
Yeah. One of the other things that gives me hope for the future is other women. I think that was really meaningful for me. I had just joined the Side B group when I went to the first retreat, and it was in the middle of a horrible time in my life. But I remember a conversation I had with someone where they were just talking about, and they're 30, 40 years older than me. And I asked some question about being Side B, being queer, and her response to the question was that I just kept falling in love with women. And it was such a side comment, but was so helpful for my brain that had just come out and was doing the whole is this just a phase? Is this something, to hear someone that much older than me who's no, this is a consistent pattern that I have experienced over the course of my life, and thus have chosen to be in these spaces that I think we don't necessarily get from our families or from churches or from community. Another random thought connected to an earlier thing is that Timon Lee sometimes talks about how the church mandates demisexuality onto women, and so always talks about women's attraction as if they need the emotional attraction, and sometimes they have sexual attraction but very rarely, and how that both harms demisexual women and also allosexual women who then their experience is not lining up with that experience, and that we talk about that as if it's the norm. That's for women.
Whole conversation,
right? And then the shame that comes with that and all of that. But I just think it's important.
I'm sure me and Joanna both have specific thoughts on that.
No, you're totally right. Our culture in general, but especially Christian, I think, spaces have no place for sort of a non-demisexual female experience, I feel like, because that was so me, and I felt so weird, I felt so I don't even know how to describe it, but just being able to, people always talk oh, well, the woman's thing is this totally different thing, and I was like, it doesn't really feel that different to me. When I was hanging out with and this says something not wonderful about where I was in a lot of ways at that time, but I would hang out with guy friends in my teenage years, and we would think relatively similar things and make relatively similar comments. And yes, I had a lot of internalized misogyny going on at that time that fed into that. But there was also a level of, I respond sexually outside of relationship. I just do, and that's real, and it's not everybody. It's certainly not the only story. But it's part of it, and it doesn't make you not a woman to feel it.
Yep.
And it doesn't.
Like I like the like what you mentioned earlier, like you mentioned Eve, and I like how a lot of, at the very least in Side B spaces, how a lot of gay men, they really do love Eve Tushnet.
Yeah,
And it's the one book that we had for a long time, and I've still
yeah,
not read it. Please
yeah,
forgive me. But we've all read a lot of the guys' books, is
yeah,
the point I'm getting at. We've read, because that's all there was. And we
yeah,
learned how to relate to their
Yep.
experience, even though it wasn't our own.
yeah. Right,
And
we'd
I
have to
think,
translate it and extend it to ourselves. Yeah,
right, but we still learned things from it.
yeah,
And I think now that guys are finally having the opportunity, and there are materials available to them, that there are like books and thinkers, like a lot of them, they all really love Bridget as well, that they have access to that
hmm,
material, they have access to a different perspective, and
yeah,
they are also learning to do that same thing, and they're
yes,
willing to also learn from women. That's
yes,
also really encouraging to me, that they'll take that and use that as like, hey, this person said this and this is important, and it's not just only from um you know the guy that's always in charge or whatever. Like, it was before, I think you always looked to whoever was the, the elder pastor, the gray-haired guy or whatever, and now it's not so much like that. And they'll go be like, hey, this person's saying this, and it's like, not just because they're women, like Sarah said, it's not like, here's the woman's perspective. It's like, hey, this person has a really good point, and
yep,
it happens to be women that are being um mixed into the conversation like that. And that also really makes me very hopeful
yeah,
that those materials are being accepted and really being taken in
Mm.
by the
yeah,
by the guys in our spaces.
definitely.
Any last thoughts? Did we cover everything? Not everything, obviously, but the
We've
the goal.
completely solved the problem.
Oh
Whoop-de-doo.
God,
Love
no.
that for
It's
us.
fixed. It's fixed. It's fixed.
I guess I would say some also, like, if we were to think of like what guys could do, like, so they don't have to come and ask us, what do you want us to do? I think one of the things would be like, if you have girls in your group, now don't be like Sarah said, don't be like, so what do the girls think? Don't do that. But if you notice that a woman is in your space and she's not saying anything, it doesn't mean she doesn't have anything to say. She probably just doesn't know if you want to hear it or not. And depending on our level of patience that day is how determined we're going to be on sharing that. But if there's a woman in your space, she probably does have an opinion. Ask us. Like, ask us what we think about whatever's being talked about. Or if it's just someone, it's like, I usually like what you say in other areas, so you might have something to contribute to this. What do you think? And we'll greatly appreciate that. But I think that's one way to get it included, because sometimes when someone's not saying anything, you think it's because they don't have anything to say, but it's sometimes just we're tired of trying.
I have two thoughts on like what takeaways. One, I think if your friend group or your side B friend group is all cis gay men or just cis men generally, um, reflect. That's probably not how your friend group should look. And I think we talk about diversity a lot of times like in a racial way, and it's like if all your friends are white, you're doing something wrong. And I think that a lot of those principles apply along gender lines as well. If all of your friends are cis, maybe reflect. If all of your friends are men, if you're constantly interacting with men, probably there are some perspectives that you're missing and some people that you were
Hmm.
excluding. Um, oh, and I lost my other thought. Oh, I think also misogyny in general, I think, is one of those conversations that if you were not actively working against it, you were participating in it. Um, and so maybe just another note for reflection that if this is not something that you can think about and name in yourself and name how you were working against it, probably you were actively complicit and need to begin reflecting, and can do that by talking to the other men in your life and about what they're recognizing and like having those conversations, and not through always going to the women to do that emotional labor for you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just I think one thought that sort of connects to Sarah's first thought, which would be, uh, I think uh, guys in general should be open to just valuing female friendships in general, but side B female friendships more. Um, I see a lot of guys, come into groups and they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm looking for, you know, you know, m-
This
male
special
friends
bond with the
with a
special man.
guy." Right, right, right. And I don't, not invalidating that in any way, but I do wish guys would be open more to other kinds of friendship, uh, specifically that includes women. Uh, yeah.
And I think that can also come to like you said, going back to like what the first point Sarah had about if your group is all one specific thing. So like, and what we talked about earlier, like the guys getting together and including us, if they're noticing, like, hey, why is it that there's only ever one or two of the women from our group coming to what we're doing or hanging out with us or participating in our conversations? Is there something we're doing that they don't want to be here? Or is there something that is actively making it to where they can't be here? Maybe think about that. Is it because we're not in, is there a reason that they're not here, and what can we do to change or fix that or something?
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of times, like Joanna's saying, we want to be there. It's like we it's not just that we want to have our own thing. We want to be included in the conversation that everyone else is having. It's like we want to participate. We have something to say about like what the status quo is, and we can't be that if it just was like, well, you guys have your own thing. You guys go do that. And we have overlap of interest. We can't all assume
Yep.
that, the gay guys all like one thing or certain activities, and all the lesbians, they all want to do this other thing. It's like, no, it's like there's an overlap, okay? Like there's an overlap of interests of music and TV shows and clothes. Like I'm sure there's something we can, like, it's not just because I mean we've made jokes before that like if we went camping the guys would be able to put up a tent or something like that, and it's really funny. But
It's true. Sorry, I'm sorry.
I
I'm sorry.
know they said that they were like, if you guys set up the tents we'll be fine. But like, it's like it's not all gonna be like that. We can't
No, yeah,
all
yeah.
just depend on stereotypes and jokes, even though they are funny. But like it's there is stuff that, if anything, we all come together at this intersection of faith and love to talk theology until we're blue in the face. So I think there's like sometimes just remember that like Joanna says, give us a chance. Might like us more than you thought you would, even though we're not going to be girlfriend and boyfriend.
Yeah. And I mean, and if we're Christians, we're family, right? We're siblings,
Exactly.
And we should be siblings to each other. And yeah.
And that's something that's missing from the way that I think women and men are raised to treat each other in society. It's always like it's a potential mate. And if it's not a potential mate, then they're not on your radar, like we talked about earlier. So it's like, well, just because I'm not a potential mate or someone you're going to be potentially interested in aesthetically or romantically or sexually or anything like that, doesn't mean we can't be in each other's lives. Doesn't mean that we're not going to, that we can't, interact on different levels. And we all forget that sometimes, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I really hope the guys don't take this as to like we're just bagging on them. I've been thinking about that the whole time. Well, I guess that's all we have for today. This is just stuff that has been talked about in different groups, different conversations that we've had, where it's like we've mentioned a lot of times that there's not a lot of our representation, and we're not represented many times because we're not included as much as we would hope to be. We would like to see the same representation that the guys have. So this is not so much, I don't want it to sound like they were just here pointing out all these different problems, because that's not the idea. But we're just pointing out the things that we've seen over time, whether it be a year, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, however long we've been in this conversation, when we can see consistent things that we've tried to improve and we do see improving, but that it is something that we feel like needs to be addressed. Because a lot of times if you just look at your materials, you look at the things you have. It's not usually women being able or given the chance to lead these conversations or even participate in them. And I hope that this has given everyone something to think about and to reflect on. And I am encouraged by the fact that we are doing better, and I feel like we're going to continue to do so. And that this is an encouragement for all of us to also try to participate in these conversations when we're given the chance to do so.
Beautiful. This conversation was lovely.
I think this.